I actually went to college in Joplin, Missouri, of all
places.
No
way.
Yeah. I dated someone who went to Drury College in Springfield.
Okay.
So I've snuck into those dorm rooms before. So that's fun.
Oops, I won't tell anyone. Small world, just getting smaller.
Yeah, I'm glad none of that was on the pod.
We're recording. You talk about it privately. We talk about it publicly. This is the Real Estate Insiders Unfiltered Podcast. Welcome again to the Real Estate Insiders Unfiltered Podcast. I'm your host, Wiggy Wiggins, along with Mr. Robinson.
Yes, sir.
So we had Jessica Hickok, the CEO of Arello, the Association of Real Estate Licensed Law Officials, basically the association for all the state regulators. So everybody understands who we're talking about. These are the people that give your license or revoke it. So let's talk about this. It was an interesting conversation today.
It was great. I mean, first of all, she had one of my favorite answers to who she'd have lunch with. So listen for that early on. She had, we asked her about, there's a lot of stuff going on. She's like, yeah, but there's always a lot of stuff going on. It just feels, her analogy was there's always a lion over the hill. This one's just bigger and maybe a little more hungry and got more teeth. And I thought that was a great reminder. There's always stuff. So at some point we have to push past that and move on. How state and local MLSs and NAR and how all those people fit together, which was interesting and insightful, how they work together and then sometimes how they don't. Her thoughts on the days on market debate and how to increase the professionalism of the industry. And we did something that we don't normally do. I took the other side of a couple of arguments just so that we could have a thoughtful debate. I didn't even agree with them, but it made it fun and hopefully a more interesting podcast. So you're going to dig it. Put it in your ears, kids.
Jessica, welcome to the podcast. We are super excited for guests and viewers and listeners. I'm operating off of a few hours of sleep because I went into the Super Bowl. Thank you, Andy Florence, as usual. Second year in a row. Appreciate you. But we're going to have a lively show today because we have Jessica on, and I'm going to let her talk about her background and things, but we're going to go deep into a lot of hot topics in the industry like we always do, but on the regulator side, which is going to be an interesting subject. So Jessica, first of all, welcome. Thank you for being here. We know that you're very busy.
Well, thank you for having me.
Of course. So give us a little bit about your background. I know you've been in the space since 1999, if I got that right from your LinkedIn bio. But give everybody kind of a speed round version of your background and how you got to be the CEO of Arello today.
And sing the hook to "We're Gonna Party Like It's 1999" by Prince at some point. Just kidding. You don't have to do that.
You didn't invite me here to sing, I promise.
Me neither. No. Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you, 25, 26 years now, it's hard to put into a little bit of a speed round version, but I'll try here. So you're right. In 1999 is when I got licensed. And I actually started off, it was the end of 99 when I actually did get licensed, but I started off for about a year as an unlicensed assistant in real estate to a land broker in Springfield, Missouri. Huh. And that's where I learned to read all the legal descriptions, starting with section, township, and ranges. And I was just like, oh my goodness, I'm never going to use this. This is like algebra. But yet I was still hooked. And I was like, okay, let's figure this stuff out. But I was only there about a year until I got involved with a real estate investment and property management firm that was also in Springfield, Missouri, is in Springfield, Missouri. And that's where I spent the almost next 14 years of my career. The company is Dismang Properties, where I gained a lot of expertise in how to sell real estate. And the broker there is still a very good friend. And I attribute everything I learned about this industry to him. That's so awesome. He did taught me a lot of property management, real estate investments. And eventually I worked my way up in that company, even earning the Realtor of the Year in 2010 with my local board.
Nice.
And then I loved my real estate career. And that job is really what shaped my career and my love for the industry. But in 2012, I took a little bit of a twist and I actually stepped into association management at that point.
Okay.
And I was the AE CEO of the Greater Springfield Board of Realtors in Springfield, Missouri, where I led the big regionalization efforts that they were in the middle of. So we regionalized the MLS. And so concurrently with that role, I was also the general manager of the Southern Missouri Regional MLS, which was brand new in 2013.
Huh.
And so that was quite a ride. I learned a whole lot about MLSs and everything, which was great. So, and that just fueled my love for the industry even more. My background is in organizational leadership, organizational communication. So that just the CEO role in association management, it just fit really, really well for me. Yeah. So I was only there a few years before, about almost 5, before in 2016, then at the end of 2016, I became the CEO of the Oklahoma Association of Realtors, which then relocated my family to Oklahoma City, which is where we are today. So
gotcha.
Nice.
I was there until the end of 2023. That's when I joined Arello as the CEO. And I was hired to elevate the brand, strengthen the regulatory engagement, and drive impactful change within the organization.
So tell us, so I don't think everybody knows. So tell us about Arello real quick, so everybody has context to who the organization is.
Oh, sure. So Arello is another acronym because we have a lot of those in our world.
Yes, we do.
Arello is the National Trade Association. That's the Association of Real Estate Licensed Law Officials.
Okay.
Arello.
I bet those conferences are fun.
Oh, yeah. We have a great time.
I've actually been. Keith,
yeah.
Jessica invited me to speak.
Attorneys Gone Wild for 2 days.
I mean, it's very. I would say it's similar to our industry, but
that's
no,
privileged.
it's similar to our industry.
That's privileged. She said that's privileged. That's perfect.
There's definitely more of a regulatory spin on it. So that's what they do. So it's the state regulators that come to the event basically, and that are part of the association. Is that
You're
correct?
Right.
Yeah.
Yep. And the state regulators, some states call them real estate commissions or departments of real estate. And what they make up, the regulators make up the state commission staffs. So you've got an executive director and their staff that are investigators that are looking into everything, heads of licensing and everything that they're doing there. Then you also have the commissioners, which are typically gubernatorial appointed positions. So commissions range anywhere from like 7 to 12 commissioners, depends on the state size. That's about average. But Arello actually then, it's the trade association that represents them. So we keep on top of regulatory trends that are happening in every state. We keep a good digest of information so that they can each look at each other's states and what they're doing. But the biggest thing that we do is we accredit the national exam, the real estate exam.
Right.
So we accredit the national exam and we certify distance education. So all things related to licensing is really what we do.
So I have a question with because you have a unique background, right? You've started actually on the land side, which I find super interesting, and then have evolved into residential real estate professional, working primarily with investors and property management. And then you sort of jumped the shark and went to the MLS side of things. And
I don't know which side was the dark side of the light.
Both, right? Like we all have the light and the dark inside of us.
Right.
What's been the biggest change you've seen? And there's been a lot. So I know this is, somewhat of a leading question, but you'll have a great answer to it. So MLSs have been through a lot of evolving and they continue to do so. What's been the biggest change you've seen on the MLS side or on the agent side, but just with your lens and depth of looking at things, how'd you characterize the changes that have happened?
Well, I think the changes have always been there. So as somebody who has always dealt with the changes from the real estate side of the perspective of that, but also the change on the trade association management side of things. And has there been a whole lot of change? Yes, there's been a ton of change over the years. Will it continue to change? Yeah, it will. I think the difference in the change between the regulators and the realtors is that, the regulators, most of them are government state employees that are required to enforce the licensing law. And that's what they do. So, sometimes the realtors that are very immersed in the trends and the happenings, they are the subject matter experts that I think can help explain the changes that are happening to the license regulators.
Makes sense.
I want to dig deep on that in just a second because I really want to, because I feel like this is why we're having this podcast. There's such a discrepancy between like who's responsible for what, where there should be oversight and not, and certainly, you know, we've had a lot of guests on the show that have had a lot of opinions around it. Let's do our rapid fire.
Yeah, let me get
quick.
my reading list fleshed out here, and then we can get to the juicy questions.
Yeah.
So I ask everyone this question when they come on the pod because I'm a pretty voracious reader, and I have ordered every single book that's been recommended or listened to the podcast that are recommended at least once. So, favorite book or podcast this year, ever, recently, doesn't matter, and why?
Well, the good thing is I listen to you guys every week, so I knew to think about this question.
Yes, Merlin, get her $20 right now. Yeah.
And, you know, I read / listen a lot of things and keep a very good list of books. And so I looked at what I had most recently looked at and what my favorite was, because if you ask for one favorite, that's hard to do.
It's really an unfair question. I agree.
Yeah, but so the most recent favorite has been Unreasonable Hospitality by Will Guidara.
Yes.
And I don't know if I don't know if that's been brought up on your thing. It probably has, because it's a very good popular book.
It's come up a couple times. I've mentioned it. It's the book I gifted most in 2024. I probably gave away 40 copies of that book in 2024.
You know, and especially when you listen to it, because he narrates it himself.
That's right. Yes.
But if you look at that book, and the big idea is that hospitality is what sets you apart. And we talk a lot about how, you know, the cream of the crop is going to rise to the top. And that is in our industry as well. So there's a lot of unreasonableness that's being asked of people. And then we've got to be able to provide that hospitality. So it's about going above and beyond.
Yeah.
And that's what I loved about it, because you could take that into any industry, whether you work in real estate or restaurant management or whatever industry.
Any kindergarten teacher, doesn't matter.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, it was one of the best keynotes I listened to was a former CEO of Ritz-Carlton. And I forget his name, but anyways, it was one of those keynotes where he just talked about how they just do everything better, and people pay the fees at the Ritz-Carlton. It's the same soap, like it's not that much more special, you know, but you just pay for that hospitality, that experience. And Keith and I talk about this all the time, about how there's an opportunity in this industry to charge a premium for convenience and service above and beyond what somebody else does. I think our industry completely misses that, but we'll bring that back into the conversation. All right. So since you listen to it all the time, so if you could have lunch with someone current or historical, who would it be and why?
You know, this was a tough one as I thought through all of this one, but really, honestly, I'd go back and I'd have lunch with my younger self if I could go back historically.
Clever answer.
You know, when I first got into the business, because I was so young when I got into the business, you know, having been here a while now, it was my first job out of college. It was my first everything. And, you know, if I could go back and have lunch with my younger self, I would tell myself, you know what? There's so much change going on that in the end, everything will be okay. Because if it's not okay, then it's not the end. So I would tell myself, you know, speak up more, ask more questions, get curious, ask the curious questions. And most of all, I would tell myself to quit worrying about what other people think. Just quit worrying about it and let them be unreasonable.
Great advice.
I've just started, I'm looking to my right because it's sitting right there. Mel Robbins, Let Them.
I've heard of that. Yeah,
me too. I'll let you know if it's.
Please do.
I will. I will. And the other thing you should tell yourself when you have lunch with yourself is to buy NVIDIA in 2020. So you're going to give yourself just slide that one in on
or
a napkin.
Bitcoin for that matter.
For
good
sure.
Plan.
All right, let me take us down this road because we're here to ask a lot of these questions, and I really want to get your take on this. And we'll go deep into these things. I've had some conversations with real estate commissioners recently, but first, what's your take on the last 24 months? I mean, we've obviously had a lot of conversations around it, but from your perspective, and I guess what I'm looking for is from the regulators' perspectives, like what's their take? Like what's the general theme you're getting about where we're at? Are we going to get more litigation? Like what's your opinion on everything as it stands today?
Wow. Okay. So that's pretty broad. Let me see.
Well, let's just start with
down.
lawsuits and just like where we are and the questions that are happening around enforcement and things. Like, let's start there.
Yeah.
So,
okay. Well, first I'll say, and I kind of said this already, in the last 24 months, yes, lots of change, but no, this isn't any different. This is just another lion over the hill that our industry is facing. Now, is it probably more serious than some of the other lions? Maybe a little bigger, maybe a louder roar? Yes. But when I came into the industry, it was during the dot-com boom. Everyone thought home gain was going to take over. And
I remember that.
yeah,
I remember that.
exactly.
Yeah.
And then you faced all sorts of things following that. The recession of 2008. I mean, the world was crashing down. Maybe, Keith, I should have told you that my favorite book is Chicken Little. The sky is falling, But you saw a lot of things. I remember a lot of the world is imploding when the civics patent lawsuit came against all the MLSs in probably 2009. When that patent lawsuit, a lot of MLSs had to pay out settlements for the mapping and the zooming in on the mapping that they used to.
That's a good reminder. I remember that now.
Yeah, that was probably the biggest thing. But I mean, there is so much change and it feels massive. To answer your question about what the regulators are seeing and thinking is right now, just like we always have a hard time saying there's a difference between a licensee and a realtor. A realtor means that you're a member of the organization and the association. And typically that's about half and half for what we have in active licenses and then how many are actually members.
So just to be clear, 3 million licensees then roughly, and then like 1.5 million realtors themselves.
About that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Give or take maybe a few.
But just generalities. Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah. In generalities. Yes. So what the licensing authorities are dealing with right now is a lot of times their phones are ringing. And what I mean by that is the phones are going off the hook, and it's more realtors complaining about other realtors about how they didn't have a buyer broker agreement or a buyer agency agreement. And it's like, you know what, that requirement, if there's a state law, then yes, you can file a complaint, but not all states have that requirement. Right. And that's not a state law. So their big thing is you have to take that back to your association, call your local association and talk to them about it, or because that's a member requirement. So understanding the difference of what member requirements are and laws has been a big thing. But,
interesting.
We see a lot of stuff, a lot of phone calls about private listing networks and the rise of those and what's going on there. We're starting to see a lot of that. Broker supervision is always an issue. So those are some of the calls that we're seeing a lot of.
You mentioned buyer rep agreement in different states. So, you've got people who... So it is an example where, in North Carolina, they require it at some point in time. I'm saying that subjectively because everybody has an interpretation of it. But the regulators are enforcing the laws that are put on the books. And there's a difference between what those laws are that are done by the state and then what NAR is putting into place, or even what MLS rules are. And people get confused on the three. So they're trying to have, the state regulate something that's not actually in their queue. I'm going to take this off script for a second, just because it's a good setup for it. Is that, I guess my question is this the sort of the problem that we're going to see more of? Should there be more regulation from the states on some of these things, or do they not want that, or they do want that? Like, what's the general theme around some of these practices being regulated at the state level versus being done down at the realtor association level or the MLS level?
I think it probably obviously starts with communication in saying, your MLS rules and regs, and your requirements of membership within the realtor organization are not the law. You have to know your law and in order to practice real estate in your state. So know your law, your fiduciary duty to your clients, understand your fiduciary to your clients and customers, and understand your fiduciary duties to the public as well that you have. So, realtor members, they have to follow NAR's policies, but licensees following state laws and regulations, the law will always trump any kind of member policy there is.
Does the association, are they the ones that are helping influence the laws? I mean, is it the Realtor Association that's working with state regulators, or I should say maybe Congress at the state level to pass these bills? Is that the process typically?
I think there are a lot of states that have great relationships with the realtor associations. There are some that the relationship is non-existent. They don't talk to each other. They don't want to talk to each other. They have varying degrees of agreeability, if that's a word.
Okay.
There's varying degrees on what is important. So we try to foster those relationships to where the state associations, if they don't know their real estate licensing authority, give Arello a call. We'll help make introductions. If you don't know, and vice versa. I've got a ton of relationships with state CEOs or even local AEs that if you don't know your state association, give me a call. I'll make an introduction. I have no problem doing that. So they need to work together, though.
Who does the state regulators are? I guess the question I'm trying to ask is, who are they looking out for? Is it just for the consumer, or is it like where is the North Star for them?
The consumer.
The consumer. So it's going to be the home buyer and seller. That's they're trying to protect them and make sure that they're.
You got it. Yep.
Okay. And so sometimes the reason why some of the separation occurs between the regulators and, for example, estate associations, they may have conflicting interests in what they want to see happen, right. Basically. Mm-hmm.
Right.
Interesting.
Yeah. So, NAR plays a very important role in shaping, market practices as well as providing national standards of ethics. But it does leave a lot of room for the states to explore options by studying these trends that are happening and making sure that ultimately the consumer is the common thread between the regulators and the realtors, if you think about it. So now the association is going to focus on what the members' needs are,
right?
But ultimately it's the members that are serving the consumers. So.
Do you have? Do the state regulators go to? Do they work with the Congress or the Senate at the state level to change the laws as well? Are they influencing the decisions? So you've got like two conflicting people trying to get bills passed. Is that how that works as well? I don't actually know any of the answers, by the way. I'm not leading these questions. Like, I'm actually really curious. Like, is the real estate commissioner going to work with Congress to say, I want to try and pass some new bills to be able to do X, Y, and Z regulations?
Well, in a lot of states, the state agencies can't lobby for what it is that they want. So it all comes down to lobbying. So, the state associations, all of them lobby. They have a completely separate entity that they run a lobbying, they run their RPAC and all of their PAC activities to actually not just advocate, but to lobby their state legislatures. Now, if you have a good relationship as a state association with your state real estate commission, a lot of times the bills that are being fleshed out, oftentimes on the realtor side, because they're the ones that are doing lobbying, work hand in hand with your real estate commission, because your real estate commissions are state staff. They know people everywhere. So while they're not lobbying and they're not going down to the Capitol and saying, we want this bill passed, they're taking the bills that are filed and they are, then taking it from there and codifying it into the statute once it passes.
And if you're working together and they're saying, I like this idea, it obviously helps the process. So when you have a close relationship with the commission.
You got it. Nailed it.
I guess let's talk about thoughts on litigation that's occurred, and maybe we'll take it this way. We've said a lot. Keith and I have certainly a lot with our guests that there's the new rules that are in place with the settlement. MLSs are supposed to enforce it as well. I candidly haven't seen a mechanism to enforce anything yet. Actually, let's just call it.
That's a question that I've been kind of rattling around in my head. I'm sorry to derail it, James, but
no, it's fine. Yeah.
So there's probably some agents listening, right, who have seen things that maybe they wish were different happening in their local marketplace. It's a little like I find either agents are like I don't want the drama. I'm just going to go sell more houses, right? And so they just they don't turn a blind eye to it. They just don't want to get involved, right? And then there's also then you try, but then maybe I called the wrong person and I should have called this other one. Like, if someone wants to start to affect some change in their local marketplace, what do you recommend to an agent or an owner of a brokerage who, because it's sort of self-policing, which doesn't always work in a co-opetition kind of environment, right? So, what recommendations do you have for folks who are feel stuck? Like, I want to affect some change, but I don't know exactly what to do.
Well, I think the first thing is to identify why the change needs to take place. And I think that anytime change, that you have to find out if other people are dealing with the same thing. So I guess to answer your question, I think if a local real estate agent wanted to affect a change in, say, a law that needs to take place, what you need to do is go talk to your local real estate association. Start there. They probably have a government affairs committee that is attending city council meetings.
Right.
They're affecting change at the city council level, the mayoral level, the county commissioner level. They're starting there. Now, if it's a state change, talk to if it's something on the state regulatory side, talk to your state association about that one. And then obviously if it's federal, talk to NAR, because they are the ones that are doing that. To affect change, though, it's get people that are dealing with the same issues to show that this is a problem.
And you got to have the right people and talking to the right people to have those connections to start that process.
Makes
so
sense.
Back to that question, just real quick, as I want to not skip over that.
Yep.
Who's enforcing this stuff? And then is there topics going on by the regulators about any of this? Because I just go back, and I'm not ragging on MLSs, but I have not seen a way they're enforcing, for example, that buyer rep agreements are being signed before they're showing houses, which is a requirement of the settlement. So do you have any thoughts on that?
I do, and probably two lanes of thought on that. So the first one regarding the regulators and should they be enforcing that change. The regulators are still doing their job as they've always done. They enforce the laws. They enforce what the law says. So a licensing law that says, you have to disclose something, they're going to enforce those kinds of things. Make sure that you have your agreements in place according to what is required by each state license law. And the problem is that the laws and even the structure or the makeup of these real estate jurisdictions vary from state to state. So a standard regulation across the board about, what they should be enforcing probably isn't feasible because there's so many different laws that are there. However, I think that a lot of what they can do is that they can work with those local state associations mostly, but work with those state associations to help communicate that change. Communication rolls downhill, just like other sayings that say roll downhill. You start at the top.
What's the other one, Jessica? I'm not familiar.
That wasn't on my list of questions.
Well, so I guess the thing that I'm always trying to figure out is it just seems like in our industry you have license law, and then you've got MLS rules, and then you've got association rules, and then you have license.
How it really gets done in the field.
Yeah, and then you have kind of all over the place, and then you've got 50 states not all doing it the same. It seems like the expectation of following these changes is difficult, and at the same time, I don't even know how the hell you enforce this stuff. And then the repercussions, and I mean this respectfully to NAR, but I don't think people know what's in the code of ethics. I mean, I know they're required to read it, but I don't bet you they couldn't quote half the things in it. So it's like, oh, you do this, it's an Article 1 violation. Well, what's the recourse for it? Well, you can you can have a disciplinary hearing, and you can have your realtor membership, revoked. And it's like, well, yeah, but that doesn't affect the license. They can still sell if they wanted to. There's not a realtor member. So is there a crossover there at any way? Is there any type of crossover between association stuff? Is there a point where an association turns things over to the state regulators? Just curious. Is that part of the process?
The only thing the state regulators can enforce is what's in the law. So if it's a code of ethics issue, the local and or state association that is charged with enforcing that, they're the ones that are going to have to enforce what that is. Now, that code of ethics, while many of the pieces of those 17 articles of the code of ethics also match what most state laws say for fiduciary duties to, your mandatory, very basic fiduciary duties to every customer, client, and the public. A lot of them are very similar. So could there be crossover? Sure. I'm sure that there's a lot of, do the right thing and, treat others as you want to be treated is really, how it should be. But
so we'll take this down to this hot topic that has come up recently. And I, of course, get irritated when I people twist things. So we'll start with days on market because this has become a conversation, and ironically, I don't even know why this is a conversation. So I there's this idea now that days on market is harming sellers. So here's the narrative. And even though every marketplace that I can literally think of off the top of my head has when a product was listed, but let's just go with that theory for a second. And the idea is if you put it on MLS or you're showing days on market, it's harming the sellers. So they want to basically not have these things on, quote unquote, on the MLS and private. I talked to 2 state regulators, and they both stated that when you have an active listing agreement and you're telling people it's for sale, that the days on market has begun. Pretty standard logical thought process for me. But then you get
that's not really their debate. I'm not trying to steel man the other side, but their point isn't like what is the origin of days on market. Their point is I don't care when it starts. Telling people that days on market is what is harming the seller.
Correct. And my argument is that if somebody asked you what the days on market is, you need to be very clear about what your answer is so that you're not misrepresenting the facts, which is where I think you get into license stuff.
Yeah.
So,
and again, I'm not taking the other side. I am taking the other side just so a podcast is interesting, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, of course, you can never lie to a client, but that's different than telling them out of the gate or putting it on every portal and in everywhere that someone can see it, what the days on market is.
So my question going into this debate that keeps bringing up to a degree is there a point where the state should step in and start laying out some things in more factual basis so that it's not this gray area? Because I had an MLS exec go, well, what happens if they, is days on market done when the listing agreement expires? And then there's a new listing agreement with another agent the next day. Is it cumulative? Is it like, to me, this is just confusing the shit out of the consumer. And so, like, where does that start and stop?
Well, and which consumer are we talking about? Are we talking about the human being who is listing their property or the human being who's trying to buy it? Because each person may have a different want, need, and desire based on this specific piece of information. So how do you handle that?
Great question. So I will tell you, James, I saw your post on this. I think it was on LinkedIn or something like that. And so naturally, I screenshot that. Everything's screenshotable, just as it's discoverable. Don't forget. No, I screenshot it. And I sent it to our president this year. The 2025 Arello president is Janet Thoren. Arello is lucky to have her. She's amazing, been in the industry even longer, and she is the general counsel for the North Carolina Real Estate Commission. And I asked her, I said, what is your viewpoint on this? And she brought up a very valid point that, if you disclose it or if you are asked to disclose it, the law is you must be accurate. Yeah. Now, that's paraphrasing the law a little bit here, but saying you have an obligation to be accurate. You've got to be truthful and you have to be accurate. So really the regulators are saying, is it accurate or not? Now, what the definition of days on market or DOM is, this is not the first time we've been here in this industry. Several years ago, everybody was taking it off of DOM, so it would reset they'd do a small price change or withdraw it and then put it back on. But then a lot of MLSs put in the CDOM, cumulative or, continuous days on market, whatever you want to call it. Yeah. But really, as long as, if there's misrepresentation and fraud, the regulators are going to step in. If the consumer is not being protected, the regulators are going to step in. So if you have, if a property is privately marketed for weeks, but it only shows a few days on the market, it creates the illusion of fresh demand. So, that's part of the reason we're talking a lot about these private listing networks, PLNs that are popping up. Right. How long did that sit in that underground Facebook market, Facebook place that you had, and the days on market when technically it's on the days on market?
This is my only argument to it is I'm not debating the merits of the conversation. They're using builders as an example, and I'm like, it's a bad example because builders have 50 houses and they're showing one. Of course, they're not going to put 50 lots on the MLS. Like, I get it. But I also feel like it's really important that you're honest and truthful with people. And I looked up misrepresentation, and pretty much the definition is almost identical across all 50 states. And so, if they're asking you that question, or the other one that I thought was interesting was if someone's interviewing you as a listing agent and they ask you what's the average amount of time it takes you to sell a house.
Yeah.
and you're giving an answer that's leaving all of that out, then you're misrepresenting the facts. And, obviously I make words and put words in there to cause people's attention on it. But it is, if what my understanding from the three lawyers I spoke with was, if there's damages and they can prove it, then it could be fraud. Again, lawyer talk, but I just feel like there's so much skirting, and Keith and I talk about this, as you know, Jessica, all the time. It's like, why can't we just stop trying to skirt the damn facts and just present them as they are? And it just frustrates the shit out of me, because you're having leadership telling agents to do things, and I love agents. We have lots of them. We care deeply about them. They don't research things like as much as they should, and so I feel like some people are setting up their agents to get in deep trouble with this stuff.
But just for funsies, can I take the other side of the argument, and then you two just make me look stupid into these microphones in front of our dozens of listeners, right? So if I'm representing the seller and I have a fiduciary or a agency relationship with my client, and there is a compliant way that isn't fraudulent for me to reset the days on market, isn't it in my seller's best interest for me to do that?
If there's a non-fraudulent, is that what you said?
Yeah.
Way to do it?
Yeah. Like
You're
if the
working in the
MLS
best interest of your client,
if the MLS allows me to take it off the market for 30 days, and then if I put it back on, the MLS has decided that resets the days on market. Some do, some don't. I think most don't, but I have an obligation to the seller to try to do that, correct?
Yes, I would argue that you do. That's my opinion. Jessica,
Yeah.
jump in on yours, but
I mean, ultimately, if there's a rule that's prohibiting it, then you're going to have to explain that to your seller. If there's a law that's prohibiting it, you're going to have to explain that to your seller, of course. But if there's not, and it's unclear, I mean, your obligation or your fiduciary is to the seller and what they want.
Right.
If you don't mind, can I take it a different direction?
Yeah, please.
People don't think about when they're talking about days on market. When I ran the MLS in Missouri, which is a non-disclosure state, meaning they don't have to disclose sales prices to the county assessors or anything. So they're one of the 9 non-disclosure states. I don't know how accurate that is anymore as far as if there's 9 or not, but go with it.
It's pretty dynamic right now, Jessica.
Yeah, exactly. But when I was running the MLS, we would always have a lot of state agencies, housing agencies, federal agencies, and housing authorities. All sorts of different things that would call and ask for a compilation report of what the MLS was doing for days on market. And here's what I found really interesting, especially now that we're in the world of affordable housing and how do we fix this? Right. There are a whole lot of housing programs out there and funding, both federal and state funding, that is going to help those areas where real estate markets may not be as strong, or if they are. And then one thing that I don't think anybody thinks about in days on market is that's showing how strong the real estate market is. And you want that to be accurate. Mm-hmm. So if turnover isn't happening in your homes, or it's taking a long time to close them, or, the listing, they sit on the market forever, maybe that's going to help in the reporting back that comes in for getting funding into your counties or your cities or improvements. There's multiple different reasons why, but
that's a really good comment. And it's exactly also the reason why having listings not on the MLS is going to affect comps.
Right. Yeah, and the comps is a big thing, because now you're affecting the appraisals of everything. When you have
how do you do comps if 20% of the inventory is off the MLS? Like you're throwing a dart at a wall at some point. People don't think through the repercussions of some of these things. I know it's a fair point, Keith. I think you're always having to watch that, and then more than anything, what I'm trying to get at is people need to be extraordinarily careful about how they answer questions that are asked by buyers and sellers, so that you don't put yourself in trouble, because the underlying point of the theme of this was there's NAR rules and there's the MLS rules and there's the license law rules. And so you need to be smart about these things.
And most of the people transacting or representing don't know the rules, right? They don't. They are not versed in the rules.
The MLS rules and the realtor rules and all of the other rules won't even matter if you don't have a license where you can practice. So don't break the law.
So don't break the law. Well, okay, that's a good segue then. So we just said a lot of people don't read any of this stuff. Are argument's been for a long time about making licensing more difficult to this is the conversation. I'm not even sure I agree with this necessarily, but that if you raise the licensing rules, it's gonna make the industry more professional by just making it harder to get a real estate license. Keith and I have had debates on this on varying paths with it. But what is your thoughts on that? Like, what's the tone from the departments, like the commissioners about this? Is it something they want to do, but then like legislature won't let them? Like, what's the general theme that you've seen or heard over your tenure of doing this?
I have heard this a lot, is that, all you have to do is fog a mirror to get into the industry. And while I don't think that's true, there is some really good regulation, or there's some really good standards put into place but it varies across the state about how much education you have to have before you can sit for the exam. But coming back to that national exam, we hear often that everything that I learned in real estate school and on the exam has nothing to do with the actual practice of real estate. We hear that a lot. And so I think a lot of that conversation gets pushed to, well, if the barrier to entry was a little bit higher in that, then we would have more quality people who know what they're doing in the business. So you say, okay, is the exam even based on what it should be related to the industry? So yeah, it's a lot of state law. It's a lot of national law. You have to cover all of those things. But really, when the when the exam providers create these exams, what they're working off of when they build these questions on the exam is what they call a job task analysis, or JTA. That job task analysis describes what the actual real estate licensee does, what that agent does. And some of those JTAs are not accurate in what we do. So if we're going to test on that, and in order to take a test, you have to take education. So you start from the education point, pre-license education, right, so that they can take the exam. So what Arello's doing is we are actually putting a lot of resources behind this year, and that is strengthening that JTA, or that job task analysis. And hopefully that'll lead to developing a standardized licensure exam reflecting these real world competencies that agents are having to deal with.
So a little less how many feet in an acre, and a little more like how to, I don't know, talk to a client or how to.
Yeah, or what agency means.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Well, here's the rub, I think, on this topic, James. Like, I'm growing out this stupid beard, and I'm probably gonna shave it soon. So I go to get my beard trimmed the other day, and he was, chatting with the guy. Well, he's my barber, and he had to do 1,600 hours of cutting hair before he was licensed to cut hair, if that makes sense. Like supervised 1,600 hours. We don't have anything like that. And that's for cutting hair. Now, I get it. Hair is really important to most people. Not me. I'm bald, right? But so but then as soon as you talk about it, right, then I find the agents who have been in the industry, they don't want any of these new rules to apply to them. It's just the other people trying to get in, right? Like, I've heard people say 4-year degree. And then, well, does that mean if I've had a license for 20 years, but I don't have a 4-year degree, I got to go get one, or I'm going to lose my license? Like, how? It just feels like almost a version of NIMBYism, right? Not in my backyard, right? I want it to be better, but not here, right? Like, we all want affordable housing, just not next door to me, right? So how do we solve that as an industry? Because drives me crazy that there's all these lawsuits and all these other things to increase the professionalism, quote unquote, of our business, when we should be the ones responsible. If we want a more professional industry, we have control over that. Let's create it. Let's not make someone else create it for us. So how do you deal with that in real terms for the industry?
Is that question for James or for me?
Sure, it's for you. It was a good question, though. It was a long one. Yeah.
I got a little ranty. Sorry about that.
Oh, I love it. I'm here for it. So this is good. I think, Keith, people, as we talked about earlier, people are going to be unreasonable. They are absolutely going to have these unreasonable, requests for changes, unreasonable laws, unreasonable rules and regs, all of these things. Well, we have to learn to deal with the unreasonable. Yeah. People are never going to change. Some people are just never going to change, and they're always going to complain about something. They're going to be unreasonable. So the associations and the licensing regulators all of that, well, the laws may seem unreasonable. Our job is to make sure that you, one, understand them and know what they are, and provide a level of service in that unreasonable request. That's the only way the industry is going to get better. Everybody has to embrace that everything right now is an unreasonable request, but we have to work with that.
I have one follow-up on that, and then we'll go to our last question just for time's sake. Do you think that there's an element of, and I'm not leading you here, by the way, Jessica, I'm actually just want to be clear about my question because it's going to sound this way. I have heard that a lot of states don't want to make licensing more difficult because of having lots of licensees for renewals and revenue for the state. Is that inaccurate or no? Is that I'm outsider. I've heard these comments before. So
yeah, we've all heard the comments. Like that's you, Jessica, you have to have heard that before, right?
Sure. Of course I've heard it. Yeah. I do think that, no, that's not it. I think there's a lot of states that have implemented some great licensing technology behind the scenes that, I mean, that's their job, is to ensure that licensing renewals happen and things happen on the back end. There's so much there. I mean, it's part of their job. They know what they're getting into when
one way to make it more professional, you could just make the fee $12,000 a year, right? Like you can either afford it or you can't. Like that might solve the problem.
It weeds people out.
Yeah,
you are spunky today, buddy.
I'm just saying, like everyone, it drives me nuts. Like all of the ink that is spilled and keyboards that are ruined and people talking into microphones about increasing the professionalism, but don't increase what it costs and don't make me go learn more. And do you want it or not? Like if you want it, affect the change. If you don't, well, then stop talking about it.
I think that's a good comment. Keith and I do talk about this, Jessica, as well. Just that there's an element of the brokerage space that won't take any responsibility either. Like you don't have to hire these people if they suck. Like you can actually not hire them.
Yeah. Or you can fire the ones that suck.
Yeah.
Too. Right. Yeah. And really, you're doing them a favor, and they're not bad people. They just aren't. This isn't the career for them. There's nothing wrong with that. Help them identify something else to go do. Yeah. Not everyone's built to wake up every day and have no idea where their damn paycheck's going to come from. But those bills sure show up every month. Not everybody can handle that. Not everybody's built for that. And if you aren't, you're going to struggle in this industry. And you might want to go do something different. And you're actually harming them by letting them stay here longer and get into more debt and run up their credit cards and all the other stuff. If you love them, you help them get out.
Life is hard. Get a helmet.
That's right. Yeah. And choose your hard. You want the real estate hard or you want some other hard? All right. Last question. We always end with this. If you were an agent, what's the one thing you'd implement in your business today to help you for 2025?
I think the one thing I would implement is a really good documentation and checklist system. And the reason why, and I know that sounds very basic, but here's why I think that this is so important. You create a layer of consistency. You show that you are consistent when you have your checklists and your documentation in place. You show consistency in that. So while it's very basic, I've always been told in association management, never practice association management from memory. Just don't. Always reference the bylaws, look at what it is. Don't ever practice from memory. And I think a lot of people get into the habit of practicing their craft, whether it be in real estate or something else, from memory. Mm-hmm. And sometimes you forget things. So get consistent with your checklist, get consistent with your documentation so that you know that there's a consistency there. But get curious about asking more questions, and really, that's what I would do to implement and help grow my business, is be ready to embrace that unreasonableness and be ready to provide for that unreasonableness.
Well, and to loop it back to your book recommendation, right? Like if you want to achieve unreasonable hospitality, if you want to exceed people's expectations, you have to have a system or a process for it. I promise you, the Ritz-Carlton has a process for how you make the bed, how everything. There's a process, and they drill it and they teach it over and over and over and over, because that's how you get greatness. You have a system and a process. You always refine it. Like I hate systems and processes. I really do. I'm very I don't enjoy them. but they're so necessary. Yeah, James is like, yeah, you really do hate
really
them, right? Like, fill out your expense report. Like, just pay me back, right? I don't want to fill out any reports, right? Right? Or just trust me. But you need a process to consistently do something well. You need a process for it. So I think it's a great answer.
It's a great answer, Jessica. We haven't had anybody actually say that yet. Usually it's hit the CRM or your database. But
call a past client.
I like the fact that you're like, get your stuff down to a system. Not to mention it's just CYA as well.
Right.
So, Jessica, thank you for being here. It was really insightful. I don't think people realize what goes on that other side of that fence, because everything is always MLS and association. So it was really great to have you here and give us that. And I'll look forward to being more involved at Arello and hearing what's happening with the regulators and seeing how all this stuff bridges over time. So
I'm hearing a rumor you might be joining us in San Diego.
I am planning to be there. So I am
at our mid-year conference.
I'm looking forward to it.
That'll be great, because I know that our people absolutely loved having you back in September.
Oh, so thank you. It was a lot of fun. So
yeah.
All right. Well, we'll wrap up here. We look forward to having you back, and I'm sure there'll be lots of controversy the next time you're on the show. So
I love it. I welcome it.
Is every 6 months this industry's got more shit going on. So
there's another line over the hill. That's another note.
That's right.
Yeah, that's
I'll
right.
be here. So thank you. It was wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's our job to say out loud what everybody's only thinking to themselves. It's your job to subscribe to this podcast so you never miss an episode.